Rob Ramage is one of the most famous names that Canadian ice hockey has produced, a defenseman who played over 15 seasons in the NHL, playing for various teams ranging from the Flyers to the Rockies, a two-time Stanley Cup winner of the sport, yet also a name much tainted in the sport for events off of the field. For no matter the wins and the titles that Rob Ramage had brought to his teams, they have since been tainted by his actions off the field that have left everyone from his fans to his rivals to reconsider the legacy and the respect that they gave the once star player. Rob Ramage was a star player in the game when news hit the channels about a horrific incident that he had been a part of, one that has continued to haunt him to this day, one that he cannot seem to escape from.
Rob Ramage and his family are facing an uncertain future tonight. Just hours ago, a jury in Newmarket found the former captain of the Leafs guilty.
After all, for sports fans, players are more than personalities that exist on the field. For the most devoted of fans, they are idols to embody. From their upbringing to their lifestyle to their daily routines, everything is aspirational. Given this, it was no surprise that Rob Ramage's personal life was the site of intense speculation when this news broke. On December 15, 2003, Ramage was involved in an accident that took the life of Chicago Blackhawks coach Keith Magnuson. Magnuson was alongside Ramage in his car when the vehicle swerved into the oncoming lane and collided with another vehicle, injuring those in the opposing vehicle too. This accident was shocking not just to fans, but to observers too. A star player of the game was involved in a horrific accident that also took the life of a celebrated coach. In a way, sport in real life became one through this horrific accident. The accident was widely blamed as a case of Rob Ramage driving under the influence. It was reported that Rob Ramage had been drinking at a funeral service beforehand. Ramage was held primarily responsible for the horrific crash that occurred and the life that it took. Moral character is often underplayed in the life of athletes when compared to their on-field performance, but without a doubt, it plays a huge role in shaping the public perception of every sports star. No matter how good of an athlete one might be, they have to be seen as a good public character to be marketed to general audiences. For any person of celebrity status, their dirty laundry being aired out into the open is often their greatest fear. It was no different here for Rob Ramage, perhaps even worse in this case, as the more details came out about this accident, the more indefensible it seemed. Blood and urine samples carried from the crash would indicate that Rob Ramage was intoxicated at the time of driving, and alcohol was most likely involved in the crash. This only implicated him in the crash further. The media would follow the developments of the case with keen interest, and over time this would develop into a media frenzy, one that would make sure that the name of Rob Ramage was forever associated with the case and the death of Magnuson. The case would build up over several years, and even though it was years after the original crash, the public profile of Ramage and Magnuson ensured that the case was anything but forgotten. Everything from the court's proceedings to the judge's updates to the witness statements was keenly followed. Given the amount of media attention that the case was getting, it was no surprise that the media would build on it further. Eventually, it became a topic of common discussion, and as the proceedings went on, things began to be clearer. Despite the arguments of the defense to the contrary, it became evident that Rob Ramage had some amount of alcohol in his system when he was driving. This was primarily blamed for the accident, and as time passed, public opinion began to align with this too. Eventually, it seems all but certain that Rob Ramage would be pinned for the death of Magnuson. Rob Ramage was charged with impaired driving causing death and dangerous driving causing death. Ramage was determined to fight the case and would plead not guilty on all counts. His defense would consist of denying that he was drunk at the time of driving, asserting that the blood and urine tests were flawed, and that the smell of alcohol on the site came from the beer cans that had exploded after the crash. This defense would go little in court, as most dismissed it as a last-ditch effort to defend the name of Ramage. It made little impact on how the final judgment was made by the court when Ramage was finally sentenced. In the end, Rob Ramage was found guilty on all counts. Rob Ramage was charged with 4 years in prison for the charge. To onlookers, this was surprising, as the sentence was one the hardest ever sounded out for a charge of this kind, one given to a motorist with no prior experience of drunk driving. Even though this verdict was expected in the case, it shocked people when it was announced. For a public figure like Rob Ramage, being handed such a long sentence was a humiliation that stemmed from the long jail time. The sentence was unexpectedly long when people might have expected that a public figure like Rob Ramage would have been let go with merely a slap on the wrist. It seems that the justice system wanted Rob Ramage to be made an example, for others to be shown that no matter their celebrity status, a crime such as drunk driving, especially when it took the life of another, was not something that would have been lightly let go of. Rob Ramage would serve his sentence from July 2010 to May 2011, when his request for parole was granted. This accident would taint the image in the minds of many of his fans forever, who could no longer see him as the icon who had won the Stanley Cup multiple times. For many fans, Rob Ramage was the man who had been responsible for the loss of the life of Keith Magnuson. However, soon after his release from jail, Rob Ramage would once again be back in the world of ice hockey. He would soon be named as the assistant coach of the London Knights. This sudden move did not garner much attention initially. Those whose attention caught it was a shocking sight, as just months ago, Rob Ramage had been locked up in prison, serving his sentence for having lost the life of his passenger during an episode of drunk driving. Being back in the coaching seat, Rob Ramage wanted to use the years of experience and skills that he had built up and use them towards creating a new youth that could dominate the rink. But there remained a lot of roadblocks in how he would go about doing that. The trauma of the accident that resulted in Magnuson parting with his life was still fresh in the minds of many. Rob Ramage, to these people, was the one responsible for this. He would be the one that would have to repent for these crimes. Being back in the public limelight so soon was just being disrespectful to those who had suffered as a result of his actions. However, for Ramage and his supporters, the path was clear. He had done his time, paid his dues, and made amends. And even the family of Magnuson had forgiven him and did not want him to go to jail for the unfortunate incident that had occurred. He was just trying to make an honest living here and do what he did best. Yet despite the shocks, Rob managed to stick with ice hockey, as this was the game that had brought him fame and notoriety, and he intended to be back in its world. His time as a coach would continue, as in July 2014 he rejoined the Canadiens organization, being appointed the player development coach of the team. This movie showed that most people, or at least those in the administrative roles, had forgotten about the incident with Rob Ramage that had occurred not even a decade back. Or maybe this could simply be seen as forgiveness, as the family of Keith Magnuson had also told others that they had forgiven Rob Ramage and had made a plea for him not to be jailed. Rob Ramage is currently playing a role as the head coach for the St. Louis Blues Warriors, where he has been tasked with building up the team and making sure they can go up against the greatest in the sport. While his accident may have cut short the career of Rob Ramage, there is no doubt that he was already a much accomplished player even by that point. Having played in the NHL for over 15 seasons and almost half the team, Rob had a bevy of experience that could be counted on for him making a name for himself. Starting first in the World Hockey Association's Birmingham Bulls, Rob Ramage would have a very successful first season and would be named a first-team All-Star. This would foreshadow the sign of the greatness that would be coming his way. Rob Ramage would make his debut in the NHL with the Colorado Rockies. He would spend over 3 seasons with the team and show his talents enough to be traded in by the Rockies to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for a first-round draft pick. This surely showed the importance of Rob's talents to the number of selectors that lined up the stands of the NHL games. Starting a career playing with the London Knights, Rob Ramage made a mark from the early onset on the field. Playing as a defenseman, he was sought after by many teams who recognized his potential to be developed as a player and contribute to their lineups. Being too young for the NHL lineup, Rob Ramage would go to the World Hockey Association instead, where he would sign with the Birmingham Bulls. His rookie career with the Birmingham Bulls was successful to the point of Ramage being named a first-team All-Star. Rob Ramage up to this point had not played in the NHL, but there were already whispers that he would be making his debut in the league. This was especially a pertinent question to ask given the unstable status of the WHA and its fate. As things would transpire, this was exactly what would happen in the next season. The WHA would unceremoniously merge with the NHL, with some teams going over to the NHL. Most, however, would fold, and this would leave their players to fend for themselves and find a new home for themselves in the NHL. Rob Ramage would be one of these players, but lucky for him, his skill and talent would make him stand out compared to the rest of players, and he would soon find himself a home in the NHL. Ramage would finally make his entry into the NHL in the 1979 NHL Draft, where he would be selected by the Colorado Rockies. He would play with the Rockies for 3 seasons, after which, seeing his worth, the Rockies would trade him to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for a first-round draft pick. The Blues would help Rob Ramage develop considerably as a player. His defense would be developed significantly. As a defenseman, he would go on to shine as a star player for the Rockies and make his mark on the field that he played on. It was here with the Rockies that Rob Ramage would have a career-best 66 points during the 85-86 season. It would be the same season that the Blues would make the Stanley Cup semifinals. As it would become a pattern in the career of Rob Ramage, he would make plays that would lead his team to winning highs. Yet this would not often be rewarded by loyalty from the team, as he would more often than not be traded later on. Ramage's next placement would be in the Calgary Flames. It was here that he would contribute to their Stanley Cup, with the Flames winning the Stanley Cup in '69. However, soon after winning, season, he would be traded with the Toronto Maple Leafs for a second-round draft pick. Ramage's next high-profile placement would be with the Montreal Canadiens, where he would help them to defeat the Los Angeles Kings for the '93 Stanley Cup. However, soon after the win, he would be traded with the Philadelphia Flyers due to the Canadiens having a deep team. The Flyers would be the final placement of Rob Ramage, and he would play 15 games with them before retiring in 1994. Throughout his career, Rob Ramage showed grit, determination, and a can-do spirit that would serve him no matter which team he was a part of. He would show that it did not matter the team that one played in, but rather the effort they would put on the rink. This would be recognized by the fans of the game, as throughout his career, Rob Ramage would play in a number of teams, ones both good and bad, but his efforts in the both of them would stand out on their own, making a mark on spectators. Yet despite the fantastic plays of Rob Ramage, the incident would perhaps leave a lasting impact on the career of Rob Ramage, would happen after the end of his career. That being the death of Keith Magnuson, an incident still recalled whenever the name of Rob Ramage is brought up in whatever context.